He's the best ever. That's what Jimmy Hart said about Hulk Hogan, the greatest wrestler of all time, right next to Ric Flair. But here's the twist. Hart also admitted Hogan was a big softy behind closed doors, his body broken from years of performing. So if the man Hart called the greatest wasn't actually the toughest, who was? Today we're diving into one of wrestling's most fascinating contradictions. Jimmy Hart, the mouth of the South, stood 5'10" and weighed 166 pounds soaking wet. He survived 4 decades in the most violent locker rooms in sports entertainment history, and he did it by knowing exactly who the real tough guys were. This isn't about who could sell the most tickets or cut the best promo. This is about who you didn't cross when the cameras stopped rolling. The men who enforced order in the chaos, the shooters, the legitimate threats. Hart's career depended on understanding this hidden hierarchy. Today, we're uncovering his true list of the 5 toughest men in professional wrestling history, the ones who made even giants afraid. Let's get into it. In professional wrestling, toughness meant 2 completely different things. For the fans, toughness was about pain tolerance. It was about working through injuries, taking brutal bumps, and never breaking character. It was mankind falling off the Hell in a Cell. It was Stone Cold stunning his boss every week. But backstage, toughness meant something else entirely. Behind the curtain, toughness was about who could win a real fight, who had legitimate combat credentials, who commanded respect or fear when the performance ended. These were the shooters, men whose reputations kept the entire operation running smoothly. They were the invisible security system, the enforcers, the men who policed the locker room and protected the business from anyone who might expose it. For Jimmy Hart, a manager whose job was to generate heat and anger audiences, understanding this hierarchy wasn't just important, it was survival. He needed protection from the men he helped build into villains, and he needed respect from the men who actually ran the locker room. So let's break down Hart's 5 toughest wrestlers. These aren't the men he praised publicly. These are the ones he truly feared and respected. We start with the foundation of everything. Lou Thesz wasn't just a wrestler. He was the gold standard of legitimacy, a 6-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion who held the title when being champion meant something dangerous. Back in Thesz's era, the world champion had to be a hooker, someone who could win a legitimate fight if a challenger decided to go off script. And Thesz was trained by Ed Strangler Lewis, one of the most feared men in early wrestling history. During World War II, Thesz taught unarmed combat to soldiers. Think about that. The military trusted him to train men for actual life or death situations. For Jimmy Hart, acknowledging Thesz was acknowledging where the entire business came from. Wrestling was built on real fighters, men who actually knew how to break bones and end fights. Thesz represented the original blueprint of toughness that every generation tried to live up to. Hart understood that before wrestling became entertainment, it was combat. And Thesz was the man who proved that the two could coexist. If Lou Thesz represented the historical foundation, Gene LeBell was the technical genius who kept that foundation alive. LeBell was a judo and grappling champion who brought legitimate combat sports credibility into professional wrestling. He was the bridge between real fighting and stage performance, and everyone in the business knew it. LeBell's name sits alongside Carl Gotch and Billy Robinson, the catch wrestling masters who trained generations of wrestlers in legitimate submission holds. This wasn't theatrical. These techniques could genuinely hurt people. Here's why LeBell mattered to Jimmy Hart specifically. Hart managed Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart, the Hart Foundation. That connected him to the Hart family's famous dungeon, where Stu Hart trained wrestlers using the same catch wrestling traditions LeBell championed. LeBell represented something Hart could never be: authentic danger wrapped in technical mastery. Hart was all performance, all presentation, but he depended on men like LeBell, men whose skills were real, to give the entire industry credibility. LeBell didn't need to prove anything. His reputation spoke for itself, and in wrestling, that's the most dangerous kind of man. Alan Koge, 1976 Olympic bronze medalist in judo. Let that sink in. We're not talking about someone who claimed to be tough. We're talking about a man who competed at the highest level of combat sports on the planet and brought home a medal. Bad news. Brown's legitimacy was undeniable. In a business built on exaggeration and fiction, Koge's Olympic pedigree was the real deal. World-class fighting skill that no one could question. But it wasn't just his credentials. Brown had a reputation in the WWF locker room for being volatile and intense. He wasn't someone you wanted to test. And when you combine legitimate Olympic-level judo with an unpredictable personality, you get someone truly dangerous. For Jimmy Hart, who worked in the WWF during Brown's peak in the late 1980s, this was a man he saw up close. A man who represented the perfect storm of verifiable skill and genuine intensity. Here's the key contrast. Hart was a hype man. pure talk. Brown was pure action. Hart respected what he could never be, someone who didn't need to sell toughness because he actually possessed it. In wrestling's hidden economy, credentials mattered. Brown had them, and Hart knew better than to ever forget it. Harley Race was the embodiment of old-school toughness, a seven-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a man from the era when the champion had to be able to defend the title, for real if necessary, and Race absolutely could. The stories about Race are legendary. Marty Jannetty once tried to start a fight with Scott Hall in a hotel. Race grabbed Jannetty's forearm with a grip so intense that Jannetty immediately stopped, paralyzed with fear. Then there's the ice block story. At a social gathering, guests needed to break up a large block of ice. Race walked over, looked at it, and shattered it with one bare-handed punch. Everyone stood there in stunned silence. But here's the most telling detail. Harley Race was one of only two men that Andre the Giant genuinely feared. Andre the Giant, 500 pounds of human being, feared Harley Race. That tells you everything you need to know. For Jimmy Hart, Race represented the pinnacle of wrestling's territorial era, when respect was earned through toughness, not marketing. Hart made his career in the flashy WWF and WCW era, but he knew that men like Race were the foundation everything was built on. Race didn't need to talk. He didn't need a manager. His presence commanded absolute respect. And Hart, despite being all about spectacle and noise, understood that quiet dominance was the ultimate power. This isn't even a debate. Ask any wrestler from any era who the toughest man in professional wrestling history was, and you'll hear the same name, Haku, also known as Mung. Haku isn't considered tough. He's considered the toughest, universally, without question. The stories about Haku aren't just impressive, they're terrifying. In a Baltimore airport bar, 5 men questioned whether wrestling was real. Bad idea. Haku fought all 5 and admitted to biting off a piece of one man's nose during the brawl. Bobby Heenan, who managed Haku, called him the toughest man he'd ever encountered. Heenan confirmed a story that Haku once reached into someone's mouth and broke their bottom teeth with just his fingers. And here's that detail again. Haku was the other man Andre the Giant feared. Let that sink in. The 2 men who scared Andre the Giant were Harley Race and Haku. For Jimmy Hart, who worked in both the WWF and WCW during Haku's career, this was a man who represented the ultimate security system. As long as Haku was around, everyone behaved. Here's the irony. Hart publicly praised Hulk Hogan as the greatest ever. But behind the curtain, he knew Haku was the man who kept the entire operation safe. Hogan drew the money. Haku made sure nobody disrupted the business. Haku's reputation transcended kayfabe. This wasn't storyline toughness. This was real, genuine danger. The kind that kept everyone, from rookies to main eventers, in line. In Jimmy Hart's world, Haku was the apex predator. The final word, the man you never, ever crossed. So here's what we've uncovered. Jimmy Hart praised Hulk Hogan as the greatest wrestler ever. And from a business perspective, he was probably right. Hogan drew massive crowds, created iconic moments, and defined an entire era of wrestling. But Hogan wasn't tough. Hart himself admitted Hogan was soft. Meanwhile, the men who actually ran wrestling's hidden hierarchy, Haku, Race, LaBelle, Brown, and Thez, never got that same public glorification. Why? Because their danger wasn't marketable. Hart's entire career was built on selling illusions. He was the loudest man in the room, generating heat and controversy. But that only worked because there were men willing to protect him. Men who could enforce the unspoken rules when someone crossed the line. Wrestling had a hidden economy of fear. Haku enforced it. Race embodied it. LaBelle founded it. Brown verified it. Thez defined it. And Jimmy Hart, he understood it better than almost anyone. His longevity, 4 decades in the most volatile business in entertainment, came from one skill: knowing who actually had the power. Not the championship, not the spotlight, the physical power that made everything else possible. Here's the ultimate irony. Professional wrestling needed men like Jimmy Hart to sell it to the world. The showmanship, the music, the microphone work, that's what fans paid to see. But the business only survived because of men like Haku, Race, LaBelle, Brown, and Thez. They were the ones who made the illusion real, who protected it, who enforced it. Jimmy Hart built a career shouting over chaos, but he only survived because he listened to the quietest men in the room, the ones everyone else feared. In a world built on illusion, Jimmy Hart's toughest wrestlers were the ones who made that illusion real. If you learned something new today, drop a like and hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories from wrestling's hidden world coming soon. Drop a comment below. Who do you think was the toughest wrestler of all time? Let's talk about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.